Noting the time and the presence of a quorum, including the member who is on Zoom, I call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order. We will have another member joining us shortly. She is coming from the School Budget Committee Task Force, which is also the reason why this meeting is at an unusually late hour of 8 p.m. The committee will be happy to hear that this is the last time we expect in advance of this meeting. I have not checked my email in the last 3 hours, but I have not heard of any additions, subtractions, completions, deletions with regard to these meeting minutes. So that's not going to help me stall for time either. But we'll give everyone an opportunity to review one last time, because I thought I saw something, but if I can't find it now, I will be quiet and move on. Did anybody find anything wrong with these meeting minutes or terminology that they would like changed? Oh, so helpful. Thank you. Okay. At this time, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes of September 24th as submitted.
Second.
Unfortunately, because we have a Zoom audience, Zoom participation, we have to take a roll call vote. That's going to kill some time, and I'm going to actually even skip the associate members because I've not been good about that in the past. So, Mr. Noon. Aye. Scott.
Aye.
Greg.
Aye.
Allison.
Aye.
And I say aye. The meeting minutes are approved. Okay. Now we are moving on to Liaison Reports. I did not explicitly call out an ALG report for this. Did we do one at the last meeting? I thought we did. The reason I'm confused is because last night's select board, they did do an ALG report, and I could have sworn they had met more frequently than we had, but we'll leave that be. Anybody else have a liaison report, or I will launch into the select board meeting from last night?
Okay. I do have one.
Go ahead, Alice.
But I don't necessarily have to go first. I have the Acton water liaison report.
The floor is yours.
I think the only item of interest, and I think this is something we had discussed before, the increased costs. I think that some of us have noticed an increased cost in our water bills. It's both the discussion centered on the fact that the rates did go up, but they are noticing an increase in usage. I think they had said that it was one of their, in terms of measuring periods, it was one of the highest usage Q3s that we've ever had. So they've been fielding complaints or queries from the public and noting that a lot of customers who are complaining about the cost also potentially have leaks that need to be addressed. And so there was some discussion about the increase in cost and the reason that might be. And they encouraged anyone who's concerned about the increase of their water bill to look into the Water Smart monitoring option if they're not already enrolled in that. So I think Christi had brought up this topic a few meetings ago, so I thought it was worth mentioning. That's it.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Christi's not here to chime in to add on to what you said, but thank you for that update. Okay, last night the select board did meet, and select member Martin will come to the table here in a minute to go in more depth with regard to the first item that was brought up under new business, which is the special town meeting. So I will not steal his thunder, but we will go on from there. Let's see, just trying to pick out anything that is financial impact. I will say that it is Acton Restaurant Week that was mentioned. That is worth mentioning from a financial perspective. Please support your local businesses. The lease for the Acton Food Pantry has been approved at $1 a month. And if I'm reading this properly, it's a 10-year lease with 2 5-year potential renewals. If I'm reading that properly, it's in the packet. I could have it wrong, but it looks like the River Street property, Maple Street, 19 and 21 Maple Street has been will be entered into a long-term lease for the Acton Food Pantry for $1 a month for 10 years. The wayfinding signs, which does have an economic impact, has been tabled until they are in complete agreement about what they're going to do. The DPW update and the update from LG go hand in hand. The main part of the DPW update is that we are still awaiting receipt of the cost estimates. At the 9/28 or 9/26 meeting, they had anticipated that we would have cost estimates on 10/18. That has not arrived yet. I don't know if that's because they are actually taking into account our request to review this to be a 1-year build out rather than a 2-year build out. But that said, we will await their numbers. The next meeting of the DPW Building Committee is November 7th in this room. I will not read the rest of my notes. I will note that we had one select board member who did suggest that the narrative is very strong, but that she would like to see dollar amounts attached. I believe we would like to ringingly endorse that comment. Moving on to the ALG update from the select board last night. There's agreement that they are not going to use the untaxed levy capacity for fiscal year 26. So that's definitely something the Finance Committee should be aware of. Then there was conversation about whether or not the DPW should be something that should even be brought up as part of the consensus arrangement at ALG. It was commented that the Twin School, which is now the Boardwalk campus, and the fire station were not necessarily discussed, but I believe that's because they were not contentious and that therefore consensus was fairly relatively easily reached. One of the select board members said that because this has no bearing on the immediate next year, that it is not something that should be part of the consensus arrangement. Just a second, I will give the update first and then we will open the floor for comment. There was also a comment that the sooner the numbers are provided, the sooner it will be easier for the Finance Committee to make their recommendation. One member specifically asked if Finance Committee was on board on this, and the answer was that the Finance Committee needed all the numbers before they could support, but that the Finance Committee had not yet taken a formal position. And there were no other financial items at the end of last night's meeting. So I will ask if we wish to comment on these updates or if you just wish to receive them as this is what was presented in last night's meeting, and I can provide timestamps if people wish to validate what I have said. You're the first one to turn on your microphone, Mr. Noon. The floor is yours.
Just a couple of comments in the comments. In my experience in ALG, which goes back almost 20 years, that yes, capital projects, overrides, debt exclusions have always been discussed. They may not have been controversial, but they were discussed. To say it's not within the realm of ALG is to say, why do we have the line for debt exclusion on the ALG plan? I could make a counter argument if that's the case, the fact that the junior high and senior high debt is falling off is now irrelevant. So we should take that out of consideration and look at the DPW as a standalone without the benefit of the tax dropping off. And as far as, she distracted me by raising her hand now. I've lost my thought for the second point.
We'll come back to you. I'm going to play devil's advocate on that exact point before I go to Christi. That exact point, the argument is that since it is not expected to hit the taxpayer in FY '26,
you. So why don't we do a 3-year plan at ALG?
It's a very good question, Mr. New. I would also like to remind people that at the ALG meeting, when asked on the topic about whether or not I felt a DPW should be discussed as part of the consensus, I think I was potentially mildly callous, and I will leave Mr. Sullivan to approve if I was overstepped my lines or not. But that I said I believe that part of the main reason for ALG is to make sure there is not a floor fight at town meeting, at which point at least one member of the peanut gallery said, yes, that's absolutely accurate and correct.
Yes, that's what
happened.
happened.
Very good.
I would just add, Mr. Chairman, that we have always had a 3-year plan for ALG, and it has always been subject of consensus all 3 years, not just one.
Thank you for the added ammunition to make sure that the consensus rules are consensus convention is continued to be followed. I believe you wanted to say something. I'm sorry, you were not fast enough on the draw.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I did not attend the ALG meeting. I happened to be on ALG the year leading up to the year in which we were negotiating the fire station and Boardwalk campus, and then the year in which it appeared before the special town meeting. And it was entirely discussed. The idea that you could spend, in this case, potentially $40 million without having it be a part of the budget negotiations is absolutely ridiculous to me. The fact that I feel like this is an attempt to take any teeth out of ALG or just completely misunderstand the purpose. A floor fight is exactly what you're going to get if you do not come to an agreement, especially on such a contentious issue. There was no contention, apart from leading up to the final number of the fire station, and that happened a year before the station was brought to town meeting. We had a whole year of ALG negotiations. The fire station was not brought to the town meeting in the spring. It was brought to a special town meeting the following winter, at which point it had been agreed on already through the rest of the ALG process. It wasn't in a spring town meeting as usual, but it was very much something discussed through the whole thing. And the fact that we're discussing multiple years out is really key to the ALG model. There's been constant pushback to try to have it just look at 1 year. And I recognize that you cannot make future years ALGs agree to what has been said, but there's 0 point of planning if people aren't even willing to talk about it. And the idea with ALG is that we're all getting on the same board and heading in more or less the same direction. It's not if you think that you can not discuss a $40 million project. That's just absolutely ridiculous.
Thank you very much. As the person who gave the speech about the twin school and the fire station, I was not privy to the ALG meeting leading up to it, but I absolutely would not have given a finance committee recommendation if we had not been in agreement and had not been on board. So thank you for that historical remembrance of exactly what happened. Okay, are there any other liaison reports at this time? Other than the school budget task force, which is its own agenda item, and so I'm not going to have you speak at this time. Very good. As a reminder, our November dates have been moved. Our next meeting is November 5th at 7:30 in this room, which is Election Day. I do expect that that's a half an hour. I believe it's a half an hour before the polls close. I hope everyone will have taken care of their civic responsibility before they get here. Please be please be forewarned, don't cut it right under the wire. And then the next meeting will be the 19th. I still haven't made up my mind exactly where we're going to have that meeting. It is currently booked in the library, that is the expectation at this time. This is the last of the times that I expect to have a late start. And again, it's because Christi was coming from across town. She'll speak to us later. I did gloss over in the select board meeting. That the very first item in the agenda, which I suspect, and I might be speaking out of school here, might have had something to do with the executive session before the meeting started, before the public meeting started last night. There is now a special town meeting scheduled for the Monday before Thanksgiving. I immediately sent out an invitation to please inform the Finance Committee about this. That's why it is a late addition to the agenda. It's not something we normally do, but we have a late addition to our agenda because this was only put on the calendar at last night's select board meeting. To that end, I would like to thank Select Member Martin for not only being our liaison, but for being the person to step forward and give us the details that we need on what was voted on at last night's select board meeting. Mr. Martin, the floor is yours.
Good evening, and thank you. As mentioned, the Select Board voted to call a town meeting on Monday, November 25th, 6 p.m., I think, mainly for the land purchase, which I will discuss, but there are a few other things that may be on the warrant as well. So right now, there are 4 possibilities for articles on the warrant. The acquisition of the property at 19 and 35 Weatherby Street. I'll talk about, I have a few more slides on that. I don't have slides on the others, so I'll talk through the others now and then jump into the 19 and 35 Weatherby Street. The next 2 are to authorize 2 collective bargaining agreements. Those are being negotiated now. The one for the public safety dispatch is close to agreement. The one for facilities, cemetery, and public works is also possible. So if those negotiations are completed, they'll be on the warrant as well. And finally, this is less than a 50-50 chance, but there's as noted with the fire truck last year, there's a much longer lead time for equipment. We're a little bit concerned about one ambulance and whether it need to be replaced in that time frame, but the town manager and the chief are looking at alternatives, so that's, I'd say, a less than 50-50 chance at this point. So the warrant closes at noon on Friday. I would expect that all the articles will be cast in concrete by your next meeting, and that I'm also guessing that we can go to print the day after your meeting, so recommendations can make it into the warrant.
Sorry to interrupt. My understanding is that the reason the warrant is being held open until noon on the 25th is in case of any citizens' petitions. The first question is, do you anticipate any citizens' petitions at this time?
No, we've not been made aware of any. I was concerned that, we had a special town meeting called in the spring just for one citizen's petition, and the people who made that happen were roundly criticized. But if we're going to criticize them for that, I think we need to give folks an opportunity to have citizens' petitions where we're having a meeting anyway. So the schedule is very tight, so we couldn't give them very long there. But the select board voted to close the warrant at noon on Friday, which gives them enough time to get their signatures if they have something in mind.
And just because I was a fly on the wall in last night's select board meeting, there was some conversation about potentially bringing the gas leaf blower ban to this special town meeting. That was not was not finalized one way or another. Do you anticipate that that is an option to come to this special town meeting, or have you not been asked to move that forward between now and then?
This is just I want to emphasize that this is just a personal thing, not a select board decision. But I would be doubtful of that because it would require us to reopen.
I just wanted to check, you said they go to press on the warrant after our next meeting, or isn't our next meeting the 19th?
No, our next meeting is the 5th.
Or the 5th, okay.
On the ambulance, if it does move forward, would that be something that, where the expense would hit FY '25 or FY '26?
We'd have to figure that out. That was actually a question of mine, but we're not even as far enough along to say that we want to put this here. And I don't know what the arrangements are when you order years in advance, what portion you pay for upfront. So I can't answer that.
I'm sure there's a deposit, but I don't expect you to know what it is at this time. Thank
Yes,
you.
and I don't think that, I don't know. So I don't want to say whether the deposit would require debt service, but that would be, we would supply you that with that information before your next meeting if it becomes real. And like I said, I think there's a less than a 50-50 chance for that.
I believe we're all set on the other articles. The land acquisition is definitely of most interest to us at this time.
Okay, the parcel that we're talking about, it's actually both parcels here, the one in green and the one in yellow, being purchased as a unit. The parcel 174 is 19 Weatherby, and parcel 189 is 35 Weatherby. They've been held and, been kind of fallow for a long time. The family selling the property has been kind of waiting for the town to be ready, and we had other things in progress until this year, like the Conant land, which, going into it, we didn't, the water district ended up buying that, but we didn't know what the arrangements were going to be before that. And so we had asked the family to pause, and they did, and then it came back again this year. So that's the parcel. This is the parcel, by the way. This is just an aerial view of the same parcel. That it's after you come through the rotary, and things kind of pan back, from the rotary. This is the, kind of, at least in my mind, I noticed it actually when I first moved to Acton, the field with the trees behind. So it's an iconic piece of property. So my last slide is just the terms of the deal. We've signed a letter of intent after last night's meeting just today. It's approximately 32 acres in total. The selling price is $3.6 million, and plus there's closing costs and a fee to the entity holding the conservation restriction. The parcel was appraised at more than $4 million based on the land being developed. So what was its value be if it was sold to be developed into a subdivision? Staff has secured a $500,000 Massachusetts land grant for this. Land is an acronym for local acquisition and natural diversity, maybe, or something. Anyway, it's an acronym. And so there's that we've secured a $500,000 land grant. That actually is the reason for the urgency in the town meeting. That grant expires at the end of the year, and they require two things for the grant. They require town meeting approval, and they require that the land be under contract. So we have to get both those things done this year. With the letter of intent, getting it under contract is probably not difficult. And as of yesterday, we scheduled the town meeting. The letter of intent and the, if town meeting authorizes us to move forward, will be contingent on CPC approval. How CPC votes to, and if they vote, and how they, and what monies they choose to spend on this, is up to them. But this is an example. There is a, the open space set aside of CPA monies has more than $1.3 million in it. And plus the CPC can borrow money against future CPA monies. We've done that in the past for land acquisitions. It's done for Wright Hill, for example. On this property, you could see in that my first map that there's an old house on that property, that no one lives there. The sellers will remove the old house and their old radio towers there, which are just an attractive nuisance. They're rusty and dangerous if people were to climb on them. And the whole property would be placed under conservation restriction if the purchase went through, and that'll be a condition of the sale. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Out of their normal sequence. But you're talking about getting some money from their set aside and maybe having them bond the rest?
Yes. So this doesn't get thrown in the mix with the rest of their work for FY26, because this would not, this deal would close before FY26. And so any of the additions that the CPC might do to the set aside for FY26 would not count for this deal. I think that what I've said here is a possible use of those funds. So like I mentioned that the set aside currently has 1.3 million and change in it. So if they used 1.3 million and bonded the rest, this would be the the approximate results. But that the details of that, of course, are up to them.
Yeah, they may very well not want to give the whole set aside to one project. Technically, the CPA can't really bond. It's the town that issues the bond. So.
Absolutely, but there are, the bond is contingent on being repaid by CPA money.
Understood, but it's a general obligation bond.
Yes, that's correct. And so if we were.
With a revenue source.
If we were, a future town meeting were to opt out of CPA, then we would still have to pay the bond.
The obligation lives on, yes. Okay, thanks.
I'm going to apologize for not having seen this before now, so that's,
No one has.
okay. All right, so my stupid questions may not be terribly stupid then, but could you just, for simplicity's sake, for me, just kind of list the pros and cons of doing this, not doing this? I'm just, from what you just said, I think the pro is that the town gains conservation land?
Yeah.
And then the con is what, if we don't buy it?
So if we didn't buy it, it would, so the sellers would like very much for the land to be conserved, right? But really their biggest possibility here is to have the town conserve it, right? Maybe they could find someone like the Nature Conservancy or something to buy it. I don't know, I have no idea, but the most likely outcome if we didn't buy it is that it would be developed. And since this is an iconic piece of property, that is seen by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people every day, the con would be that there would be a subdivision there instead. I will note that this, and I can go back to the, you can see it actually here very well. The parcel towards the bottom of this page is already conserved Acton-owned land. And it's field on the right side of this slide and wooded on the right side, wooded on the left side of the slide, field on the right side.
All right, so my other stupid question is there like a town directive to spend a certain amount of money every number of years to purchase conservation land? Or are we just doing it because people are trying to sell property and we see it as conservation land? Do we have a stated objective to do this? And if so, what do we budget for it?
So just to be clear, these are not stupid questions at all. And I just want to say that since we were negotiating with the sellers, this was not, we had executive sessions and you could have looked in the agenda and seen what the property was. But while we're negotiating, it's not made public so that we don't, influence the negotiation. The way land acquisition works is that there's an open space committee, and the open space committee monitors and, the pieces of land in town that they think are desirable for preservation. And they argue that those be conserved. Meanwhile, the CPC, or CPA monies, were required to spend, I believe, 10% of those monies on land conservation or on open space every year. The CPC in most years puts about $500,000 into a set-aside, which is, it's just a separate fund, right? It's totally up to the CPC whether they add to it or not. And that is like a savings account for future land purchases. And right now, the balance of that is $1.3 million.
All right, so one more question that I'll relieve on microphone here. So in the spring, we were going through all the budget challenges. One of the things that was suggested but not followed through was land sale. Is there land that Acton owns that is not deemed ideal for conservation that could be sold to offset any additional expenditure that could be for purchasing property that we do believe should be conserved?
So I am not aware of any extra land. There are some tiny little parcels in places like that have been taken for tax, non-payment of taxes. Some of them are not buildable, and we would never be able to sell them because no one would want to buy them. So there's some teeny little parcels like that. There are the other open space areas we have. We have actually quite a bit of open space in town. Almost all of it has hiking trails on it and things. So I'm not quite sure the number of parcels, maybe a dozen, maybe more. It's been, and land conservation passes overwhelmingly at town meeting.
I'm sure it does, but I could just keep going on, but I'll relieve.
If I may, I forgot one question. How are the parcels zoned?
I believe that the parcels are zoned residential.
Okay. Well, then since they're only assessed for under $400,000, we need to get the assessors to do a little better job.
Just as a heads up to our members on the Zoom meeting, I'll be coming to them after the next two members to my left. If either of the two members to my left have any questions to ask. Christi, you're up.
Being reminded of the dam, and I think the Cowett land, having encountered some problems. Is there any sort of economic, environmental impact that's done as a part of a simple conservation purchase for not planning on doing anything with the land? Are we opening ourselves up to any sort of liability, even if we're just purchasing this land to leave it there?
I don't think so. I think I share actually some of the Finance Committee's members' concerns when we buy a piece of land that we don't know what we're going to do with it. So that is a concern, but that's not the case here. We intend to conserve it. We have to do some due diligence, and the purchase and sale will allow us to do the due diligence, and if we find anything, I don't know what the resolution will be, it depends on what's found. There'll be a normal amount of testing. I have, actually, all the select board members have hiked the property. There are these old rusty radio towers, but iron is not a pollutant, right? It's a nuisance and that kind of thing. There are a few old cars, and I think they're going to remove those. There's one old car submerged in a pond kind of area. That one I think we're going to leave rather than disturb the pond. I think that was recommended by the Conservation Commission. So we don't know of anything.
Yeah, the only question I have is if this does not pass at town meeting, and we end up with the owners trying to find a different buyer, to what extent will whatever happens at MCI Concord ripple up Route 2 to Acton? In other words, is timing not only urgent because we want to get this under contract in 2024, but we also want to make sure that we don't have a sort of a secondary impact once MCI Concord takes its new shape?
So this piece of land is a little bit different. First of all, it's privately owned, and so the owners can do what they want with it. They can sell it to whom they wish. I don't believe there's any connection with MCI Concord. If we did not buy the land, they would find someone else to sell it to. Other conservation might not give them give them their nest egg, right? And so they'd probably sell it to a developer and it become a subdivision. And it's been appraised now multiple times and it could handle a subdivision there. So, but that's completely up to them, right? The appraisals are based on the subdivision, but the owners can do what they wish.
Allison Jones, would you wish to ask any questions at this time?
No questions from me. Thank you.
And Dave Wellinghoff, do you wish to ask any questions at this time?
Two quick ones. The CPA bonded portion, is there any discussion on the time frame that would be paid back?
There probably is discretion there, and usually the treasurer would figure that out. Obviously, land has a long, useful life, so we could bond it for a while. But in that case, we pay more interest. So I mean, it's just a finance decision.
Thinking more the opposite, just to the point of it actually being a town liability is this something that should be paid down relatively quickly just to remove that, from the town's balance sheet, so to speak. And then, does this property generate any tax revenue at all right now? Sorry if I missed that.
I think, I'm not sure the answer to that. I could get you the answer. So
It's currently assessed at around $400,000, so not much.
Did you hear that?
Okay. Yeah, 400,000 assessed. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks.
Okay, so I have two questions. As the chair, I get to go last. Just to make absolutely sure that I'm hearing properly, and I think I have, but I want to drive a fine point home on this topic. I believe you said that this would not impact the different buckets for CPC for this year or for any subsequent year other than the requirement to cover the payments to the $1.9 million bond. Is that accurate? So it has no impact on this year's split into the 5 different categories of where CPC has to go.
I'll say yes with an asterisk unless the debt service starts next year, right? So, you know, if, let's say we take out the bonds in 90 days, I'm just throwing that
Which
out
would
there.
be super fast, and I
Right.
understand that.
Then the debt service might hit in FY '26. And in the way the CPA monies are managed, when they figure out what monies the CPC has every year, they take a few things off the top. They get the top line number, and then they take a few things off, and one of them is the debt service for other things. Like, for example, we're still paying for Wright Hill.
And that taking off the top does not have a bearing on the different buckets?
So the bucket is a percentage.
Yes.
So the percentage, I don't know, actually, I assume the percentage is of the top line number, but I don't know that either. And so the percentage is still the same. So they would have a little less money to, you know, to distribute among project applications in future years until the bond was paid off.
Understood.
Right, so this year, the CPC has something like 1.4 million to distribute among projects. That, I assume, already has this is just numbers that stick in my mind, so please don't, I'm not absolutely sure of them, but I think I'm right. I think we pay $80,000 a year in debt service for Wright Hill, so the top line number would have been at least $80,000 more than that, and then the amount that they have to distribute comes out the bottom.
Can I see if I can help?
Please do. And then I have one more
Okay.
question.
So the CPC is funded by a surcharge of 1.5% on everybody's tax bill. And then there's the state match. The state match, which
Can be
rolling this
0.
year, about 25% maybe. So once they get the total of the surcharge and the state match, which, yeah, is around $1 million something each year, then the percentage things are taken off that top number, but they are minimums, not maximums. So anytime they put money aside for open space, that's covers their 10%. Any debt service that they pay on open space that they've already acquired is part of that 10%. So it's not limited in any way by the 10%. It's 10% for that for affordable housing and historical preservation. Now, that's a tough one. They usually have trouble making 10% on that one.
Yes, and if they can't do the minimum, then that carries forward.
They have to set
So if
aside
they only use 5% for historic preservation this year, whatever the actual dollars are for the other 5%, they carry forward to a future year for historical.
And then my last question, and I want to be very careful to get a solid answer on this, so if you don't know the answer tonight, please come back to us before our next meeting. What exactly is allowed use under CPC conservation? And the reason why I ask, and I'm being very pointed in my question here, is I believe this was a set of land that was identified within the last 3 to 5 years as potentially being a discharge for a new water treatment plant for sewerage running down 2A. And so my question is this a way, is that an allowed use of conservation land? And is this a way of restricting the use of this land such that it become that much more attractive for use for sewerage?
No, we couldn't do discharge on conserved area. Sometimes conservation restrictions would allow some uses like active recreation, but I think this grant does not allow that. And so this is just a passively conserved site. So we can have hiking. I believe we can have, parking that's used for hikers, not train station parking or something, but parking as an accessory to the main use, that kind of thing, but very little else. And in conserved property, we could not do discharge.
Prior to our next meeting, I'm not going to ask the committee to vote on this tonight. This is literally the first we've heard of it. The first I'd heard of it was last night when I tuned into the select board meeting. But prior to our next meeting, especially before we make a recommendation or not, I would like to get very clear in writing definitions or proof that this could not be used for a discharge or water treatment facility in any way, shape, or form. Is that something you could help facilitate?
Yeah, I probably could find some things, but I absolutely guarantee that it is not allowed under the conservation restriction.
He's not my favorite president, but he said trust but verify. So I would,
So there are two reasons why I can't, just so you know. This grant would not allow it. They won't give us the money if we allowed that. And a normal conservation restriction does not allow that either. As I said, even getting active recreation is kind of not a normal thing in a conservation restriction. It can be done, but this grant doesn't allow that.
so it should be super easy to meet my requirement. Thank you
And,
very much.
one of the things is that's why I noted at the bottom of my last slide is that the whole property is being put in under a conservation restriction.
It's the same conservation restriction as the existing conservation set.
So they're all individual, and they have particular uses and particular details. There are lots of examples, right, down to whether you can cut down trees or not, whether you can who put up blazes for trails or not, all sorts of things. So, and who gets to reroute the trails if the trails need to be rerouted? They have all sorts of things like that, and there are many examples. I can probably find the restrictions on the land grant. I don't think that I'd have to go read the letter of intent again to see if the letter of intent definitely says that the land should be conserved. Whether the letter of intent lists all the uses or not, I don't know.
I would like to see that because I would hate for there to be a surprise later. So please furnish that or have the town furnish that.
So I'm not sure that that's a public document at the moment. I'm sure we can share it with you, Mr. Chair, and we can certainly share the land grant criteria.
If we need to have an executive session for next meeting, I'm sure we can make that happen.
Okay.
But I am saying that that is something that I wish to see.
Okay.
Are there any other questions before we take public comment on this topic? Tara?
Very much, Chair Reddish from Mass Ave. David and I sometimes disagree, but in terms of the CPA limitations, I believe he's spot on in terms of the limitations. They would not allow that. But I will tell you that in another town that I'm working with from neighbors in Natick, a piece of land was bought for conservation, and then some years later, whether you like or don't like dog parks, it was then proposed up for a dog park because the town hadn't filed the paperwork for the conservation restriction. In this case, we're talking about CPA money being used, so I don't believe they'd be able to pull that, shell game or fast switch, whatever that's called. So I do want to say that I am always, as a former select person, I was always uncomfortable with these executive sessions shielding what's going on in terms of the negotiations for land purchases. Because if the other side already knows the information, why would that then be shielded from the public? When the purpose of the executive session is to prevent any disadvantage by the town to negotiate the price with the owner. If the owner already knows the price, already knows the conditions, why should that be shielded? So that's something for consideration some other time. I love the idea of this becoming conservation land. We so badly need conservation land, walking trails on Route 2A, where a third of the town lives, and something like 5% of the conservation lands are accessible within what they call, progressive planners call the 5-minute walk or roll. to get to conservation land. So Boston has already achieved 10 minutes. Within 10 minutes, anybody can walk to a park. Acton hasn't even measured, but Boston is already progressing towards the 5-minute mark. I'm almost done here. I hope that the growth study still is going on. This land becomes part of the MCI because of the 40B constraints, and whatever person that would buy it besides the town would be instantly in line for a lot of money being thrown at them to build on that land. And the tax status, I believe, is because if you file for agricultural, you pay practically nothing in taxes. So I feel like that's not really, it's important, but not for this discussion. Thank you so much for talking to me or listening to me, and I thank you for considering this article. I am very much in favor of it for a whole long list of reasons, which I'll outlay at town meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the speaker brings up a third way that it's restricted. So you can't use CPA monies for, you can only use CPA monies for the things that CPA monies are allowed for. You can't buy a piece of land for general municipal with CPA monies. So that's another way. So it's restricted 3 ways to Sunday,
Wonderful.
I guess.
Just put it in writing.
Well, that's the law. You can go read the Massachusetts law. So I can probably point you at that and point you at the land grant criteria.
Very well. So we will undoubtedly be asked to recommend or not recommend at our next meeting. Who would like to take the lead on this between now and our next meeting, knowing that it's only 2 weeks away? Greg, you are the first one to raise your hand, and people are pointing at you. Have I made it clear what I'm looking for?
Yes, and it turns out the connection of this land to MCI Concord is actually historic. Dates back to the late 70s, early 80s, when the state owned all the land along Route 2 and was planning to expand MCI Concord at that time. And there was a bill to transfer ownership of all that land for that purpose, which did not happen back then. So the fact that we're now 40 some odd years later, it would be nice to lock this door down before we discover there are other forces at work next door.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, if there's someone assigned to the collective bargaining articles, if those get completed, I'm happy to contact them or have the manager contact them.
Mr. Noon's hand went
I
up very
always do
quickly.
collective bargaining.
And I
I
don't.
do not wish to swim against 20 years of precedent here. Mr. Noon has the collective bargaining agreements.
And whether we buy a vehicle or propose to buy a vehicle or not, that's a coin flip, and I'm happy to contact someone if that comes up as well.
We're going to voluntold Mr. Borden on that one because he loves the fire trucks.
Okay.
So he really does, and he's not here, so he has been voluntold. I love the fact that the person laughing the loudest was the person who was voluntold at the last meeting. And we will get to that in just a few short minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That actually does bring us to the cost-cutting initiative. I will turn the microphone over to Christi, and I will, by way of harkening back to what it was just said, we did ask Greg to write some verbiage in our last meeting, which he got voluntold, so I will let Christi go through that verbiage at this time.
Greg has written up some text which he will present to us. I just want to check once again, we had been discussing doing this at our meeting on November 19th, having our listening session then. So before we send anything out, we will need to know where that meeting is going to be.
And we can work on that together, and I will take my direction. I believe you prefer the library, and that is still on board, and our liaison has informed me that this can be recorded via Zoom, so that we can disseminate this and still be on the public transit tracks that you were interested in.
Wonderful, thank you. And I will hand this over to Greg. I want to check one more thing. I've been in discussion with the Council on Aging about us being able to do a listening session at the senior center. The date that they are now planning out for December, having already sent out their November newsletter. They're wondering if we could come on December 3rd, a Tuesday, from 6 to 7. We would need a quorum to be present. Okay, we've got 3 of us. 4, we need 1 more. 6 o'clock on a Tuesday,
don't
December.
count. They don't
Oh, I'm
count.
sorry, no, associate, yeah. I appreciate it, though. December 3rd, 6 o'clock.
Let's plan on making,
Okay.
let's say yes, and if we have to twist arms later, we will twist arms later.
Okay, thank you. So we will plan on that date. We will add it and our other listening session location to what Greg is going to read to us now. The idea is that this will go out in a news flash to the town and hopefully in an email or some such.
Before he proceeds, have you already, I'm sure you have, just because I have never done this before. Do you have everything you need from a logistics perspective to send out a newsflash, a town newsflash?
I'm going to send it to John, or I will send it to the manager's office and they will help me with it.
So I'm looking at Mary Ann, who is.
No, this is what, I spoke to John about it and this is what he said to do.
Fantastic. Very good. So yes, you've already investigated the logistics. Thank you for taking
Yes.
care of that.
I don't know more, it's more of a, give it to someone who knows what's going on level.
Excellent.
Please take it over, Greg.
Well, that'll teach me to leave town.
Exactly.
So I got back late Friday night. Saturday morning, I discovered that I'd been volunteered. And I was asked to draft something that can be sent out. What I don't know is there a word count to what gets blasted out?
So if the question is the word count for a news flash? And
Yeah.
so there is not a maximum or minimum word count, but usually news flashes are minimum just because of the whole idea that you want to get the message across quickly.
Yeah,
So I would suggest is that you present what you have, and then if the FinCom feels like it can be shortened or lengthened, and then we can work with the final result.
Okay. So anticipating that, because I've never done this before, I wrote 3 versions of, one is 67 words long, one is about 126 words long, the other one is about 188 words long. And my hope is that once we add specifics like, oh, by the way, the meeting will be located here on this day and time, so I don't have any of that information, we will have a short, medium, and longer version of what we are telling people. Instead of just saying, hi, we're holding a meeting, please come, I determined in the longest version of this that we probably needed some context because we get, I don't know, 45 people watching ActonTV to keep up to date with what the Finance Committee is discussing. So a lot of them may not understand why we're doing this or why this year, isn't this a departure from previous years? So in the long version, it's 4 paragraphs long, and the first 2 paragraphs provide context. In the shorter versions, the context begins to disappear to keep it shorter. And we're holding a hearing, we would like you to participate. Now, I can read these. Can we email them?
So I purposely did not distribute this to the entire committee because I did not want to be accused of violating the open meeting law.
Right.
So I would say, why don't you read the first one?
Okay.
And the long one.
The long
And
one.
we, as the bears at the table, will determine if you have reached Goldilocks status. And if not, we will ask you to read the middle-sized one and see if we've then reached Goldilocks status.
I'd be inclined to start with the middle and see if that just does it.
Executive decision, please start with the long one.
It has a headline. Acton Finance Committee holds listening sessions. In a normal year, the Acton Finance Committee, FinCom, reviews the budgets for the town and the regional schools and makes recommendations to the select board and other appropriate entities, such as the Acton Leadership Group, ALG. The FinCom also presents their assessment to the annual town meeting and issues an opinion on each of the warrant articles presented to the town meeting. But this is not a normal year. On April 30th, 2024, Acton voters narrowly approved an override of the tax levy limit. Out of 6,406 votes cast in the annual town election, 3,205 were yes, 50.03%. 3,160 were no, 49.33%, and 41 were blank. So the FinCom has formed a focus group to hold a series of listening sessions to give residents and taxpayers an opportunity to share their thoughts on what they consider to be essential services, as well as their ideas on which costs could be cut. This will help the FinCom to articulate a clear and united municipal message, to develop and advocate for unified policies, and to share information and work together to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of municipal service delivery.
So, mangling this metaphor, I would say that that porridge is too bland insofar as I would pull out the out of line in paragraph 2. I'd pull out the out of all the way to the end of that paragraph, and the rest of it I think is acceptable, and I like it. I would pull out that bland bit about the actual numbers. We do not want people's eyes to gloss over at this time. We're looking for opinion, not necessarily the hard facts until we have fleshed out what the opinion means. I'm willing to entertain the medium porridge, but I like this one if we pull out that, the second line of the second paragraph. Yeah. How does everyone feel about that? Christi, this is your show. I shouldn't have said anything.
Oh, no. I'm sorry for not having gotten back to you sooner. Outlook decided on, I didn't need to know about any emails until today. It was a nice little break. I really thought I hadn't gotten anything since sometime last week. I would start with FinCom is looking for your feedback on taxes and services. Your part to that effect, first thing people see, so they have a reason to keep reading. I like the description of what we do and why we do it, but they have to somehow maintain interest reading through that to get to what we're looking for.
So change the title from Acton Finance Committee holding listening sessions to Acton FinCom is looking for your feedback. Does that deliver what you need?
Yes, and maybe, I'm sorry, I don't have it right in front of me. I just want to look at, I think one of the sentences from the end could be moved up into a first paragraph level.
No, the fourth paragraph is one sentence. I only noticed this because my son is writing college essays.
So the FinCom has formed a focus group. I would make that be, take off the so and make that be the top sentence, the top paragraph, and then explain why we're doing it. I know it's a little backwards for writing in general, but I think it will maintain people's attention.
Then we do have to add at the end of it, he's absolutely right, we do have to add the logistics of when the next meeting will be and how it will be.
So if I am correct, and we basically are starting with the FinCom has formed a focus group?
Yes, except it's not a focus group.
The Acton Finance Committee is looking for your feedback.
Yes.
Okay, the Finance Committee is looking for your feedback.
Your first paragraph is solid. The second paragraph, I would pull out the statistics.
Hold on, I'm recommending that we take that third paragraph and move it to the beginning. That is the opening paragraph of the article.
Okay.
Because if there's anything we want people to get out of it, it's that.
So we open with the third paragraph.
Fourth,
Third.
third? Third, sorry. Sorry, yes, third. Third.
Okay. We eliminate the numbers. And we need a specific closing in terms of where to go and when.
Our first meeting, our first session will be held on November 19th at the Acton Memorial Library, first floor.
Okay, our first session will be held on November 19th.
Correct?
What time?
7:30. Now, does this sound appropriate to the rest of the committee, or will the rest of the committee allow Greg and Christi to finalize this verbiage and put it into the newsflash? I'm not looking for a motion per se, I'm looking for nodding of the heads. Very good. Okay. Greg and Christi, do you have what you need?
Yes, and I assume I can go ahead and put the second date in there also, what we discussed at the senior center.
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome, thank you.
Doable.
Now, Christi, that does mean between now and the 19th, God forbid we have people who show up who are not interested in being vocal. I do recommend that you have some friendly seeding questions to help spark fun conversation.
I already have it in mind.
And that is your homework between now and the 5th, 19th, my apologies. Greg, do you wish to add anything? Very good. Christi, do you have more to discuss on the topic of the cost-cutting initiative at this time, or are we on hold as we look forward to hearing feedback from the public on the 19th?
That is it for that subject as far as I'm concerned.
Great, so we'll let you off the hook and you're done with that topic. Oh, gee, look, you're on the hook for the next topic as well, which is the school budget task force update that you just came from earlier this evening. And I would like to extend the committee's gratitude to you for doing back-to-back meetings this evening. Please share with us what you discovered at the school budget task force meeting today.
So Tori Campbell has been the school committee member running these meetings. She stood up and the first thing she talked about was the various things they've been looking at for cost cutting. There were 6 items, although one was split into an A and B section. In this budget that is currently coming out, they are have stopped using reserves for one-time things. Oh, sorry. They are only going to use reserves for one-time things. That's what we want. They are not planning on using reserves, as I know it, but that is in this budget going forward. They've saved money by switching over to Maya for the health insurance, and she said something about transportation adjustments. It wasn't a context in which I could get more details about it. But my understanding is that they have compressed some of the routes and maybe are leasing fewer buses. It was a little hard to follow everything and right at the same time.
Would it be?
Hold on, Corinne was there. I think she can clarify.
I think what they're talking about is if they were to go back to single-tier elementary busing, that they could reduce the number of buses.
We'll have to find out more, because she said it's in the fiscal
It's already in it.
26
Maybe they got
budget.
rid of like 4 bus routes or something
I
like that?
think that might have been.
Okay.
And then what we're working on in the timeframe of the task force is, and again, Corinne's gonna have to confirm this with me, because I was writing and a little confused at the time. Start times, looking at educational structures, that's where people are assigned in the district, which is most of what we discussed, and getting into how much could be saved by eliminating school choice, what benefits are there are there. And then she said off the table for right now, and she said for right now, is closing a school. I think it's important they got the conversation away from closing Conant. It's really about the idea of closing a single elementary school, not necessarily that specific one. I think people have focused in on that because of the building. She said it would save about 1.4 million, but it would make classes beyond what is a good level in the other elementary schools to shift all the students over there, even if you just shuttered Conant's building until a time when the education enrollment ramped back up, and that it would do a lot of harm to the students. So they think that it's a better savings within the context of providing good education to focus elsewhere. Less disruption to the communities and the children. The consultant then stood up and he presented us ideas that have been effective for other schools. This company has worked with more than 300 school systems in greater than 30 states. They've been around this block a lot. And he pointed out that some things will sound crazy in some places that seem totally normal in others, which was kind of interesting in the context of this. We're all sitting at tables with a mix of whoever shows up, and you're encouraged to move around. So today I was with a librarian, parent, and then just sort of a citizen at large. Last time I had a principal who I was sitting with and a teacher and a librarian, and it's so hearing all the perspectives has been very useful. He presented us with, I believe, 4 points. We'll see if I get to a fourth. One way that a lot of schools will view budgets is they will round up the FTEs for people. They'll maybe really only need a 3/4 of a teacher for something, but they'll just presume that's one teacher. Then they find other things for the person to do. They're not sitting there 1/4 of their time, but that's not necessarily the best way to split it out. One way to approach that, to limit that hiring, is to just share some of the resources more around the district, that you could have a reading specialist who was shared between schools. It especially works well in our system if you have the twin school.
Was the consultant suggesting that we are currently in the regime of rounding up FTEs?
No, okay. They are going through a bunch of analysis, which will be discussed next time. This was
Thank you for
ideas
the
that he is
clarification.
currently seeing working in other districts that a lot of places are looking at. Some are reacting very negatively to, but have found great savings in others. It's sort of trying to get us used to a shift in
Understood.
thinking.
Thank you.
With any of the changes, he said it's very important to phase changes in through over time. These aren't just drop down the changes. You need to change support systems, et cetera, the underpinnings of administration, all of it. He also pointed out that equality is not the same as equity, that it is easy for systems, again, not necessarily ours, to allocate resources based on the school when, especially in terms of specialists, social workers, mental health, et cetera, it's really much more effective to use it based on need. So if you have one school who needs much more reading help, they should get more than one reading specialist, and one school that needs much less should not have a full-time reading specialist, and that you can, again, you have to figure out the logistics, but split it across multiple schools is a good way to do that. And actually, to do that and pretty much everything else based on formulas, looking at the results that you get, being willing to try things and then back off them, which is a different way. He was saying a lot of people get into their sort of thinking about how they've been doing things or how things should be done. And he's trying to encourage school district to move towards actual analysis. The third idea was, I'm defining it as work smarter. I actually work with the teachers who are doing things to help them figure out how to be more efficient. The example he gave was looking at a group of reading specialists and how many kids they were serving, and was that meeting the need? And they realized really they weren't quite, but part of what the specialists came up with was that they were choosing students based on the classroom, when the classroom was available, as opposed to grouping together the kids with the same problem. So they were having 5 kids come in with all different problems when they could be much more efficient and give much better results if they brought in 5 kids with the same problem and work with them on it. And once they started doing that, they moved up to larger group sizes and were able to serve more students with better results. So this is back to the little bit of magic he was talking about somehow you do more and get more, or get more out of it and you're not spending more money. So, and again, all of this was followed up by math and anecdotes, which made it sound very good. But a lot of what I took away from that one is the idea of, again, you want to roll this out over time, but empowering the people working with the students to help look at it from a systemic level and move the change.
I hate to ask such a finance committee question, but are there metrics that they can use to measure against that to see that they're making progress?
Well, yes, and that's what he's pointing out, is most places don't know what those metrics are. So these were just high level, here's what I have seen in places, examples, not here's what's happening in your school. But he's saying specifically, what is the average caseload for a reading specialist? How many kids do they serve? How much of the time over the course of the day do they end up serving that? Are there ways that you can shift their non-reading specialist jobs to other people and have them reading specialist more of their day and improve everything? So the overarching thread for all of this was figure out what you need to measure and start measuring it and see how when you make changes, what effect that has.
I'm about to ask a subjective question, which is a terrible thing to do in a body that likes hard numbers, but how did that go over in the room?
I think pretty well.
Okay.
He's saying, look, there's a lot of things we don't tend to keep track of, and it ends up, you need to. Another example he had was of the social workers and counselors in the school. They just you look over districts and they'll spend on average 30% of their time working with students one-on-one. The rest of that time is spent doing paperwork and in meetings. He said if you look at professionals, they spend 87% of their time working with people, one-on-one or in group. Some districts have limited the paperwork and shifted the meetings such that they can actually turn down the meetings and are getting much better results, much better coverage for the students in terms of the mental health help that they need over by making it be 75% student time, just by telling the people that they don't have to come as many meetings. They said was hugely helpful, and switching over to doing more group things, not just one-on-one, really broadened the ability. So he's talking about measuring a lot of those jobs that you don't measure.
Okay.
So he's trying to shift the mindset in that way. And I guess there were only 3 points. I feel like there was a fourth, but that might have been when I needed to leave. That was it. I'm going to find out. I had to run out before it was done to get here. They were going a little over. So I don't know what homework was left. He is hoping to come back for the next meeting with data based on, they took everyone's high level ideas I'd mentioned last time about what if we just did this, what would it save? And they're still crunching those numbers. He should have those for us.
And the next session is the 12th, is that correct?
Yes. That's it. Any questions or anything you'd like me to bring up with them?
I would love to get a little more clarity on this single-tier busing, whether it's single-tier busing they're moving to, or if they're changing, getting rid of 4 bus routes, or if they're changing the start times. I'd like a little more structure on that.
You mean on the saving in the fiscal year 26 budget?
Correct.
Okay.
If there is something scheduled for the out years, that would be good to know too.
Okay, I'll follow that up.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
Thank you, Christi. Do they have a goal for how much they aim to cut with this task force?
How much they aim to save? Is that what you're asking?
How much do they aim to cut?
No. Not in any way that I've heard. It's as much, I'm going into this with some optimism and some realism in terms of what could actually come out of it. And I'm really hoping that there will be something good, that this isn't effectively lip service. We're still in the sort of everyone's trying to understand where we are phase. I'll have a better idea for you later on. It's a fairly compressed time frame frankly, to get anything big to come out of. I don't see how it could. But if this is in any way successful, the idea is to move towards other topics that could have bigger impact, but would also be harder. They were talking about looking at special education and something else further down, if this is effective.
Are they going to measure effectiveness at the end of FY25 or at the end of FY26?
Don't know.
So I have a question. My sense when I'm listening, because I'm the only peanut in the peanut gallery, is that the conversations often seem to be dominated by people, like by teachers or school committee members. So I'm not at the table hearing, are the regular people speaking up and not being bulldozed by experts?
So what you hear about, I mean, I'm at my tables, and I know how I'm going to handle the discussion, so I don't know how other people are dealing with it. I'm finding it very useful to hear from the teachers, administrators, et cetera, what their experience is, and then showing them sort of the other perspective of it, and using that, because he'll present a question of, how can this be done in this district? And you have to look at the teachers and the administrators and be like, well, how is it being done? To know what could be done differently. And then today we had a parent sitting with us, and so I was able to talk about leveling is one of those things that we look at in terms of equity. Isn't this wonderful? But is it, I'd love to know the actual benefits educationally that we can measure going forward on having moved people squished down into this more middle level. And you're also dealing with teachers across lots of different.
Yeah, I mean, like at the first meeting a couple weeks ago, what I heard was from teachers, it seemed like, oh, I can't imagine having any more, burden on my time, whatever, I don't know how they phrased it, but basically, any bigger class sizes is the way I interpret it. And, you go back 10 years and the class sizes were bigger and the kids were fine. And so, I mean, I've talked to teachers who taught some of those huge classes at the high school that we used to hear about, and you would have to, I mean, they should really get some input from some of those people. They were not forced to teach classes that large. They basically volunteered to do it, to give kids at higher levels basically a college-like experience. They were like honors classes. I'm not saying you would have 42 kids in an elementary school, but I mean, when you have to, they have not addressed declining enrollment. And that was actually another statement I've heard Mr. Levinson, is that his last name? Okay, Nate, say, I think he mentioned it last week again, and that when, districts are growing, but there's growth, but the budgets can't keep up with the needs with the growth. We do not have growth in this district.
That's something that I was going to discuss with our chair, how we can get the district to quantify some of this for us, because there has been a significant increase in requirements, mandates for helping kids. There's been a significant shift towards English language learners and special ed's needs. So I think it'd be great to have the school district come in and quantify some of that for us, and also just write down the numbers for why closing an elementary, just lay it out for us to see and for everyone, because it comes up so often in conversation.
To that end, something that has not been, that I've not had a chance to discuss with anyone in this committee on is the conversation that I had with a school committee member. There's two things in immediate, well, one thing in immediate succession, one thing in medium-term succession. The first is we should be getting the October 1st enrollment numbers, which is the most important, rears and chairs number of the year. We should be getting that any day now. And then the second thing is in discussion with the school committee, with a school committee member, I should not say the entire school committee, in discussion with a school committee member, we are hoping to try and actually in response to a request from a select board member who had asked us when was the last time we had done any kind of housing analysis, we're actually hoping to craft an appropriately worded, for the lack of a better term, SQL query that does not step on anyone's privacy rights and does not show any information that should not be made public, to see if we can't have a better insight onto what housing turnover might mean for enrollment in the 1, 5, and 7 year. And I realize those are odd numbers, but they make sense if you think about the terminology, the timing in the 1, 5, and 7 year roles. And so we have not even socialized that with the municipal side yet, which is so I'm giving you advance notice of what we're trying to do. And obviously, we would absolutely need quite a bit of the municipal side support on this. Our expectation is that because there is the census that goes out every single year, and in correlation with the fact, this was actually brought up at last night's select board meeting, so I should mention it now. Don't be surprised if there's an assessor walking around your property. There's been an announcement about it. There's 3 people whose names you should be familiar with in case they show up on your property. If we should be able to correlate the yearly census along with what we know about the given property and housing turnover. We're trying to come up with the appropriate SQL query to run on this so that we can have a newer visibility into enrollment. And again, this is the early stages of this, but this is a year that I think everyone, after last year's squeaker, I think everyone is willing to start looking at different ways of trying to have more powerful data. So that is an initiative that I've not brought back to the committee yet, and I've not shared with the town yet, so Mary Ann can knife me later. But this is definitely something that the school and the school committee and the finance committee are very keen on having a greater visibility into. Sorry to catch you off guard on that one, but that's been discussed as well. Does that address your, provided we can have that data and have it bear fruit, does that address your concerns?
Well, yeah, I mean, better projections would be great, but
Absolutely.
I don't see 1,000 students coming back anytime soon. We're down 1,000 students from peak enrollment.
Yeah, I think the question there is it costing more resources to educate some percentage of that?
Yeah, and like I said, I feel like those, I get that there might be more needs, that's what I hear, but there's also a lot fewer students, and there should be some offset there. It shouldn't just be always going up. You know, per pupil spending is up 65% in the time inflation up is up 32%. It's very out of whack. And, so, again, the population's going down. Obviously, that's why per pupil is going up, but except I don't see 1,000 students coming back, and that's the main thing. And they said that even, I don't know, I hate to go down rabbit holes, but I guess that's what I do. Like regionalization, that was supposed to get us like some economies of scale, combine 3 districts into 1, get rid of some administrative overhead. We have more teachers and administrators now than we did before. So like I looked at some, I don't know, like in the time that we've lost maybe 400 or 500 students in the last 5 years or something, we've only got 4 fewer teachers, according to the DESE website. So that so when I hear them talking about like, oh, let's do fractional FTEs, don't round up in that meeting tonight, I wonder how that's going to be received by the teachers.
Please send me that information, because I'd love to know if, when that says 4 fewer teachers, if it means teachers or FTEs, because that makes a huge difference.
It does, and there was, I'm not 100% sure about it. If you go, I mean, it's on the DESE website, and I can point you to it.
Please do.
I was actually on there today looking for the updated enrollment data, which is not yet there. It was supposed to be, they were supposed to be in on the 18th. But the, that just went out of my head. Forget it. I just forgot what I was going to say.
Thank you.
It's all food for thought. This is all fodder for future conversations indeed. Are there any other topics on the, Greg?
Just a question. What Acton is going through in terms of a drop in enrollment is not unique to Acton. My son is a history teacher at a high school in Boston. They've seen declining enrollment. They too were trying to wrestle with, what do we do? One of the issues that they're wrestling with that I haven't heard in Acton, and so I don't know if it's an issue here or not, is the impact of cell phones in the school system. Now, maybe that's a different issue in a different place, but to the extent that, and it's anecdotal, my son says that teaching has changed dramatically because the students aren't focused on the teacher, they're focused on their social media feed. And so again, that may not be a straight financial issue, but it certainly impacts the outcome. And it may explain why, you could manage more students in a classroom before the iPhone than you could today.
I don't know. It specifically has not come up.
Fair enough. Okay, so we will look to hear more from you from the 12th. Other than that, because we did all of our meeting minutes and our Finance Committee business first thing in the session, I will look to Gang to take care of his responsibilities.
All right, thank you. I move to adjourn.
Second.
Not debatable. All those in favor, we have to do this by roll call vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Hold on a second. I believe roll call requires the roll being called.
Mr. Noon.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan.
Aye.
Ms. Anderson.
Aye.
Mr. Jarbo.
Aye.
Ms. Jones.
Aye.
Mr. Wellinghoff. Not hearing Mr. Wellinghoff, he will be marked as an abstain.
Aye.
Aye, thank you very much, Mr. Wellinghoff, and I am also an aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.